Evelyn Scott stood at the head of our Thanksgiving table with her wine glass raised as if she were proposing, a toast that said, "I love my secretary." The turkey got cold as stunned quiet fell. When it hit our dining room, our son David stopped eating with his fork halfway to his mouth. Katie suddenly became very interested in the cranberry sauce on her plate. Patricia, my sister, dropped her jaw, and Robert, her husband, looked deeply into his napkin. Interesting, she's 22 years old, and Scott kept talking about pride as if she were a child. It was a big deal in and of itself, and she's everything you're not, Evelyn. I wiped the corner of my mouth with my napkin and looked at my 25-year-old husband. Years, good timing, I answered, my voice steady even though my heart was racing. Evelyn Hargrove, who is 51 years old, has been a senior accountant at Westridge Financial in Grand Rapids, Michigan for half a year. I've built what I thought was a safe life with my family by balancing numbers during the day and family needs at night. My husband, Scott, our two kids, and our simple but nice home in Heritage Hill. It was easy for me to want to get old with the man I loved watching. Our kids are building their own lives so that they can retire and maybe travel a bit. What was in my way now was his love for Jessica. The young secretary he hired 3 months ago showed signs of his midlife crisis. Insurance company? The wrongdoing wasn't just the betrayal. It was also the public shame that he made the choice to tell our kids about his leaving at Thanksgiving dinner with the family. Relatives, as if daring me to make a fuss, told me we could talk about the details later. Scott said, graciously raising his wine glass to new at first. No one joined his toast, and Katie suddenly stood there in tears. As she ran out of the room with tears running down her face, David stared at his father with a mix of disgust and shock. "I think you should leave," I said quietly. "It's still my house," Scott answered with a cocky tone that made it sound like he'd already figured out how to get ahead. As our friends awkwardly left, I said, "I'll pack some things tomorrow." They went back to their study, and Scott took the rest of the wine bottle, which I started automatically emptying. While I was loading the dishes, my mind was strangely calm, even though the wreckage of my marriage was all over the dining room. It wasn't until I looked at the blinking light on our answering machine and pressed play that I heard the voice of my It's James Benedict calling, "Evelyn, Uncle Edward's lawyer. I have some important news about your uncle's will. Please call me as soon as possible." Uncle Edward was my mother's brother and had been single all his life, but had made a lot of money in industrial real estate. Died 3 weeks before. I'd always been his favorite niece, but I had no. I thought his will would include something more than just a keepsake or a small memory. Little did I know that even more dramatic events were about to happen after Scott's leave. Arrival and I met when we were seniors at Michigan State. He was charming, driven, and had a quick smile that seemed to make people like him. Always aimed at me, I was focused and tidy. Already making plans for we kept each other in check during our careers as accountants. His spontaneity tempered my rigidity, and my realism anchored his. Dreams, or at least that's what we told ourselves. I got married when I was 26 years old. I worked at a local accounting company, and Scott started his own insurance business with a small amount of money. Business loan. The first few years were tough, but we were happy. We worked hard to save for a down payment. We spent almost 10 years fixing up our Heritage Hill Victorian, and the payment was due in just 6 weeks. To return to work after maternity leave with each child while juggling the demands of motherhood and a job as Scott's business and goals grew, and his small office moved to a great spot in the middle of downtown. Over time, his clothing went from suits from department stores to ones made just for him. He joined a country club, but since he didn't play golf very often, I backed these efforts because I knew people who could help me find wealthy clients. I steadily moved up in my job because I thought they were investments in our shared future. I wasn't very impressive, but my careful work and high moral standards made me famous. As I worked my way up to senior accountant at Westridge Financial, my pay stayed the same. Uncle Edward had always liked my work and supported me when Scott's commission-based income went down. When we got together once a month for lunch, he would always say, "You're the antenna to all those grasshoppers." When he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 6 months ago, I'd always be planning ahead. I went to see him once a week and brought him home cooked food that he rarely ate and company that he seemed to value more than I thought. When I look back, I can see the red flags in my marriage. Scott's growing criticism of his sudden interest in fitness was caused by my wise clothes and regular habits. At 49, the new convertible was bought without any talks about the late nights. At the office smelled like an odd perfume. These are common midlife crisis habits, I knew it, but I didn't pay attention to it because I told myself that our base was too strong for such cliches to weaken it. When I told my sister Patricia about my worries, she told me that guys go through phases. Edward was going through something. About 50 years ago, remember the motorcycle? So I waited for the time to. I thought that being married for 25 years had taught me to be patient and understanding. Even when Scott talked about hiring Jessica and said she was smart and intuitive, even though she wasn't very experienced, I tried to hide my worry. She was younger than our daughter, after all. Wouldn't have been so obvious 2 weeks ago when I brought lunch to his office out of the blue. The receptionist's sympathetic look should have told me what a surprise it would be to find his door locked and people laughing quietly. Coming from within, I dropped off the sandwiches at the front desk and drove back to work. I picked trust over suspicion because I told myself there had to be a good reason. Now I'm watching Scott refill his wine glass by himself as he celebrates his loyalty over proof. Damaging our family, I began to think about whether I had been loyal to a man who had never really. There was the morning after Thanksgiving, which had the clear clarity of a Michigan November morning. I'd slept. He slept fitfully on the couch in the living room because he didn't want to share the bedroom with Scott. He had stumbled up the stairs well. After midnight, he left an empty wine bottle in his study. I made coffee and I called James Benedict's office and left a message with his secretary while still wearing clothes from yesterday. Went upstairs to get new clothes, but Scott was already awake when they got there. Without being asked, he said, "Jessica's apartment is too small for both of us." He then stuffed shirts into a "with my bag packed, I'll be staying at the Parkview Hotel until we find a better place to stay." Stung more than I thought it would. "When did it start?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm. Scott paused, maybe surprised by my straight question. Does it matter? 25 years of marriage deserves at least honest about how it was going to end. He sighed as he sat heavily on the bed we'd shared. July at the company lunch she had been interested in for decades. He looked interested, but his face turned guarded. "Do you know how long it's been since you were really interested?" Anyone who hears anything about me, Evelyn Jessica, gets excited. About my plans and thoughts, I told her straight out, she's 22. At 22, everything is exciting, and not just because that's how old Scott said it was. She can see the real me, the one who got buried under bills, college funds, and life insurance. I looked at my husband's thinning hair, the expensive watch that had recently been stolen, and his new hair dye. I changed the one I gave him for our 10th wedding anniversary with designer clothes that pressed a little against his skin. Middle-aged paunch, who was this man who could forget 25 years of past with you just to be nice? I said, "I think what hurts most is someone barely older than our children. Very carefully is that you didn't respect me enough to end things in private." Scott was kind enough to look at. He looked ashamed for a moment, then his face turned serious. I needed. The people who saw it need to know that this isn't just a one-night stand or a midlife problem. They can help you get through it. This is real. The cruel words he used in his public announcement suddenly became, it was clear he wanted to make me feel bad so that we couldn't get back together. He is the only one to blame for our marriage, so I wouldn't fight for it. See what I did there? Scott might have said something else, but the doorbell cut him off. I went downstairs to find a messenger with I signed a certified letter with James Benedict's law firm as the return address. I opened it in the kitchen, reading through the formal legal language until the keywords jumped off the page receiver with a controlling interest in the whole portfolio and a number that made me clutch the kitchen counter in order to help 4.7 million Uncle Edward who had lived. Despite being very wealthy, he left me his whole estate, including all of his business properties, investments, and even the inheritance was set up as separate property for the charity foundation created after my marriage and clearly marked as belonging only to me and not the marital estate. The letter had a note written by hand from Uncle Edward Evelyn. I've always respected your strength and loyalty, but life has a way of putting them to the test. Whatever comes next, this is your safety net. He knew this, or at least he thought I might need to get things on my own if he saw something in Scott that I hadn't, or if I had my own worries. More than I thought. Upstairs, I could hear Scott talking on the phone, and his voice was moving as he spoke. Told someone Jessica about his liberation, which means my numbness was giving way to. There was something else, not quite anger or relief, that helped me understand I told you that the lease is paid for 5 years and it's yours. Start Scott. More than you deserve, but less than you thought you'd get. His eyes got big as he said this. I finally got it. You own my building. Now I own a lot of things, I answered. Be cool and sign the papers that ended my marriage 6 months after Thanksgiving. I watched workers put up the new company in the lobby of Hard Grade Properties. The commercial real estate company that I had received from Uncle Edward now had my name on the signs, which was a sign of my name was Scott, and he had signed the divorce papers that January afternoon. He was a little shaky as he agreed to the terms. His plan to end our marriage in a successful way had failed. Him embarrassed and diminished, Jessica never came back after quickly calculating the diminished returns of a relationship with a man who was going bankrupt. Our kids had dealt with their dad's deception. Katie kept a cold distance in different ways, agreeing to meet for lunch every once in a while. But David refused to talk about anything personal after his initial rage had subsided. Settled into a cautious, limited friendship with his dad, and both of them were proud of how I'd handled things. Katie had seen during a recent event that you didn't let him destroy you. His goal was to break you so he wouldn't have to feel anything, right? She might have been guilty after the public announcement of the cruelty they had shown, planned to make me look like the rejected wife, which would help our social circle understand why he did what he did. More important to himself, I had come out stronger, richer, and I was surprised at how well the accounting skills I had used throughout my work now served me as I grew Uncle Edward's property. Holdings added 3 buildings to their collection in the first 6 months that they owned it. Agency kept working in my building. The only thing that connected us was a regular electronic rent payment I'd set up. Heard from people they both knew that he had tried online dating but wasn't very successful at it. Women his age found his past, with younger women lost their interest when they found out that he was having money problems as the installation crew. When I was done putting up the sign, my phone rang with a calendar alert. Dinner with James Benedict to talk about the I doubled the number of scholarships given by the educational organization every year. This year's recipients, who were mostly women seeking business and finance schooling outside of spring, had changed. Grand Rapids went from gray in the winter to bright green at age 51. I was starting over, but not with rather than resignation. They were filled with hope, curiosity, and a deep understanding of the difference between worth and worth, the future that lay out in front of me, unwritten and all mine.